Yeah, I think I suffered from a bout of imposter syndrome at that point. And again, and I talk about my work with the IOC and Pan Am Sports going hand in hand. And I was in a room with people from the IOC and all these heavy hitters in our sport. And I just didn't feel like I belong. And they're looking at me for answers. They're asking questions. We're having interactions. And I just, for a second, couldn't remember how I got there, why I deserved to be there, and what I had to contribute. So I made the right decision, I think, and I called you, and you were able to get me back on track and feeling confident again.
You are and will always be your most valuable asset. Welcome to the Me Inc. Podcast, a series of conversations with individuals living happy, healthy, and engaged lives, while exploring the importance of emotional intelligence to thrive in this ever-changing world. My name is Nigel Franklin, a CPA, MBA, and a certified emotional intelligence coach. My mission and passion is to enable others to be that best version of themselves by understanding the importance of making investments in their physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Let's start the show. So for today's conversation, we have Allianne Pompey. Alliann is the director of track and field and cross country at St. John's University. She is a four-time Olympian in the 400 meters, a former NCAA champion in the 400 meters as well, and the former record holder in the 500 meters at the NCAAs. She's the president of the Pan Am Sports Athletes Commission and a member of the International Olympic Committee, the Commission for Athletes Liaison. I think that's right. So I think I would say welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nigel.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I'm sure I didn't do you full justice on sharing kind of your background and who you are, but we'll go a little bit more into that. But excited to have you here, excited to chat with you today. Been looking forward to this.
It's been a while.
It's been a while, but we made it work, and I'm looking forward to today. So start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about who Aliann is.
I don't know how far back we want to go, but
No, I like to go back to the roots. I'm sure we'll get some really interesting stories if you start back as far back as home.
So I'll start with this story, and maybe this will frame some things. I was in primary school. I was born in Guyana and lived in Guyana for a long time before migrating to the U.S. So I was coming home from primary school one day, and
Primary school is like grade school for individuals.
Yeah,
here, right? All right, cool.
Elementary school.
All right.
I was going home. I got into a little heated conversation with a girl that was my friend. Her name was Bernadette. We were fighting over this guy. His name is Dale, right? And apparently Dale liked Bernadette and not me. And we were going back and forth about it. And she called me ugly. So I'm walking home in tears, and I don't know how loud I was crying, but this random street vendor on the way home stopped me and was like, "What's going on? What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I'm not going to tell her." And she roughed me up a little bit verbally because that's what Caribbean adults are allowed to do. And so I ended up telling her. And she was like, "Who?" And I said her name, and she said, "She called you ugly? You let that dunce girl call you ugly?"
Dunce is an interesting one, right? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of connotations when you use dunce. And then she said, "So what?" Which is not the response I expected or wanted. She was like, "So what if you're ugly? What's that going to stop you from doing?"
Yeah. Okay. That's okay.
Right. So that I feel like is my story.
I don't think I was expecting it to start there. So you're, but I guess it speaks to a mindset, right? And being unlimited. But yeah, so you're there. When did you move to the U.S.? I like that. Again, I didn't expect it to start there, but we're good.
But
all
I
right.
feel like that's my what is it they say? That's my villain origin story,
Okay, all right,
or my
right.
hero origin story, because I think it framed a lot of things for me. But I moved to the U.S. when I was about 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
We moved upstate New York, which is nothing like Guyana. It was freezing cold. We moved in April, so there was still that chill in the air, but the sun was really bright. So we would always, every day for 2 months, not 2 months, maybe a month and a half, because it is upstate and it's cold for much longer, but we would get dressed look outside, see the sun, get dressed in totally inappropriate clothes, go outside, immediately come back in and change.
I actually had that when I went 30 minutes away, got off the bus. Like I jumped on the bus, got on the bus, got off the bus, and then realized that because the sun's out, that doesn't mean that it's not cold.
Yeah.
Okay. So you moved upstate.
We moved upstate, correct. Albany region area, specifically Latham was the first.
Okay. So close to Stockbridge. Like I now work in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. So Western Massachusetts. Right. I think it's actually pretty close, but going back. All right. It's a different place. It's
a different state.
It is very different from growing up at home. I think it's the way that I would say it is that you land in Brooklyn might be on one end of the spectrum, but that's on the very other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly.
And going, okay. And then?
And then I graduated high school up in that region. We moved around a couple times. And then I moved back to New York City for college. I went to Manhattan College for undergrad.
Sorry.
And just before leaving high school, actually, my last year of high school is when I started doing track, but I only did it because my sister was doing it and we were very close and I just wanted to be close to my sister. So whatever she did, I was doing, and she did track. So I ended up doing track. My high school coach insists that I never ran against her. I just ran just to be second to her. One day he put me in a relay that she was not in, and I absolutely crushed it. That was the end of it. I went on to be the Olympian, and she went on to be the doctor.
Okay. So Manhattan College, interesting. We crossed paths, never met, really.
Right, yeah.
Competed around the same time. But I think I heard of you. I did hear the name, but I never had the opportunity to meet you until probably years after we competed. Right, probably sometime really long after. So it's an interesting part of the story. But it seems like that shaped you, or that started your path to where you were now. What would you describe as those formative aspects, right? So you started running, found your way to the Olympics, but what would you say was the formative aspect of that experience?
It's always someone saying something to make things click for me. So my first year at Manhattan College, one of the guys on the team said something, and my response was that I was going to win NCAA. And he was like, "How fast do you run now?" And I told him, and he was like, "How fast do you think it takes to win NCs?" I was like, "At least 51 seconds probably." And he was like, "You think it's that easy that you're going to get there?" And
where were you at that time?
What do you mean?
What time were you running in that freshman year?
Probably 54, 55.
Okay.
We hadn't even raced yet. So at least not at the collegiate level. And I literally 4 years after that, I won NCs, and I remembered it, and I called him and I was like, "Hey, you remember when?" He was like, "Yeah, I remember the date." I was like, "You remember what you said, dude?" And he was like, "No, I don't remember saying any of that." And I was like, "What do you mean? This thing fueled me for 4 years. How dare you forget it?"
So extremely motivated, you're saying?
In certain things, yes. But I think on a day-to-day basis, yes, that kind of put in my mind that, hey, people don't really think you can do this. You can. And so there's motivation in that way. But on a daily basis, weekly basis, getting through the workouts or focusing on the things that it takes and making that slice to get there, I'm not thinking about that conversation or that's what jump-started me staying on track for a little bit.
Still on track. It's still X amount. So that you should thank him, because that conversation has opened up many doors for you. What's interesting is that you're saying it's okay to be externally motivated, but the habits, the behaviors, all those things are the things that you still own to get you there. From the story that you shared, so 3 years later, you won NCAAs. You went undefeated for most of that season. What's the difference? So if you think of it as peak performance. Looking back then, what were some of the cornerstones of that peak performance? I think you shared that you didn't lose a race until outdoor NCs or maybe the Olympics. Right, yeah. So what was the framework? What was the fuel? What was the approach to that peak level of performance?
One of the things that I really love about track and field is that it is an individual sport, and you can always kind of test your strength against you the day before or something like that. And so I always like figuring things out. Like I used to be really good at math because I like having a solution. And the problem was I didn't run 51 or 52. I didn't win NCs. That's the problem. It's the solution. So that just the journey of getting there was fun for me. I just honed in on that. I know I needed to be able to do these certain things in practice. I know I needed my rest. And in order to be on the team, I know I had to be a good student. So I just looked at it. This is the outcome that I want, and just made my life and everything else fit around it. I think my dad and my sister and I talk about this quite often. He was just really good at getting it to sink in for us that youth is fleeting. And if there's something that you want to do, and if you're going to capitalize on it, you have to capitalize on it when you're young. You can't waste time about it. You know that I'm probably in track and field not going to be a 40-year-old Olympic champion in the 400 meters. So I know I had a limited amount of time to do it. So whenever I was looking at the things that I had to sacrifice or anything that I had to give up in order to do it, it made it easier knowing that I'm not giving this thing up forever. I'm doing it so I can achieve these goals.
I like that. In that sometimes I often share that we often want things, we have to pay a price to get it, right? There's always a cost. It is important to understand that you're sacrificing. So you're making the best of the opportunity. But dig a little bit deeper. So you know what the problem was, you know what you wanted to do, what the outcome you were seeking, but how do you manage, that's a race every weekend. So that's let's go with 12 weeks for the season, including NCs. And that's a lot of training. So you have to train to peak at the right time and everything else. What's the mindset to maintain that peak performance? So when you look back at the times that you're your best, what were some of those key things, traits, themes that were bouncing around in your head?
I really like competing, and I like running a race, and the things that I talked about with my coach and the things that we prepared for, just there was nothing more exhilarating than a well-executed race for me. And so putting it together was fun. And that in itself was a motivation for me. Honestly, feel like it didn't feel like work. I could run a 600, run my guts out and lay down on the track afterwards. And if my coach says to me, that was perfect, you hit this target, and that target, I didn't feel anything else after that. Part of my history is that I'm the oldest child. I have 7 other siblings. I grew up in a house with, most of the time, there were at least 4 other siblings in the house. So I was the oldest. I was always doing something. I was always responsible for someone. I always had to help with something. But with track and field, it was always just for me. I controlled all of the outcomes. I get exactly what I put into it. At least in the beginning of my career. As I got older, I put my all into it and got back very little. But at that time, everything that I put into it, I got back. The more I put in, the more. So it was just perfect for me. It was my one act of selfishness, if I can say that. It was the most selfish thing that I could have done.
It's interesting that you're saying performing at your best, or that peak performance period, the things that served you well was being selfish, taking care of you.
Absolutely.
How does that play forward in life? Like self-care, self-love, that selfishness. And I'm stopping just short of saying that self-love is selfish, but that focus on you and your goals, how does that play forward in life? Because you presented a structure that I think is pretty cool. You get what you put into things. How do you play that forward?
I feel like it's, in a way, my metaphor for life. And we talked about making sacrifices and giving up certain things to get where you want. That's not just with track and field. That's with anything in life. It's the same with relationships. It's the same with work. You can't necessarily have everything.
So that's pretty cool. Take me to your senior year of school. So you fast forward those 3 years, your senior year of school, I believe you went undefeated through indoor season. So that's probably 12, 13 races indoors, and then you have all of outdoors. So you shared that you didn't lose a race until the Olympics that year when you were healthy.
So I actually lost the first round of the NCAA. I did qualify for the NCAA meet that outdoor season. The indoor season was almost perfect. Like you said, I didn't lose a race. I won every conference title, broke the NCAA record in the 500, floated outdoors. It was going well. Overreached a little bit. I think I probably should have rested one weekend, but I just felt like I could do everything. I got injured. And so the first round of the NCAA, I lost. And then obviously went to the Olympics. I didn't win the 2000 Olympics, so clearly I lost.
Right.
But it was an incredible year.
So what are some of the tenets and what are some of the things going on? What do you think? The way that I think about it and some of the things that how I thought about performance back then, performance now, that's a period of peak performance, right? But what are those traits and what are those behaviors? What are those things that you think served you very well in those periods of time?
The selfish part of it, I think, played a huge role in that. I found it got easier and easier to make the decisions that would benefit me. Like, I didn't party that much. I stopped playing drinking games. Again, because the process itself was so much fun for me and it was something that I was doing for myself, it just made it a little bit easier and it helped me to see things in a certain perspective. I've said a bunch of times that sports is my metaphor for life, and the same kind of attitude and diligence that I had with the sport transcended. It was the same way in the classroom, same way in my relationships. Whenever I sat and I thought about something too hard, I would just think, all right, if this was an issue in track and field, how would I solve it? And it really would become clearer.
Okay. So you had that peak performance year, I think your senior year of school. You went undefeated indoors, I think, and most of the outdoor season. I think you shared that. Your first loss was at the Olympics. So what are some of the things that you were, like, if you look back then, what's the thinking, what's the mental framework that you had that served you well? I think that's when you won NCs, you broke the 500-meter record. So what are some of the things, like, how are you approaching the days, day in and day out of performing at that high level?
I was really focused at that time. I knew what my goals were. I had them in place. I had an excellent coach who to this day is one of my closest friends. And we just came up with a plan that I thought was more than reachable. It wasn't going to be easy, but I thought it was attainable, and just executed and stuck to that plan.
Yeah. But you talked about overreaching, and that's what got in the way. So you're going along, where everything's turning to gold, and then you do something else. So what was that like? What was that overreach?
Yeah, it's interesting that we're talking about this now, because we were having a discussion, the other coaches and I, about that today. We have a talented group of athletes here at St. John's University, and same thing, we have a structured workout plan for them for the year. And one in particular is a little bit ahead of that. And so we were talking about that, but that's one of the things that led, I think, to my injury and eventual losing my first race that year. I went undefeated indoors, won NCs, broke the NCAA record, was doing great outdoors. And there was a week or two that we were debating whether or not I should rest, but I felt great. I was ahead of schedule and I should have rested because I ended up getting hurt. Made it to the NCAAs anyways, but I lost it in the very first round and barely made it back on both feet in time to compete for the Olympics. I got a little bit excited. We overreached, and I think that's when, because my coach was always trusted my take on things, and after a while left it up to me to say, I feel good, let's go for it, let's take some chances. But I was still in college at particular occasion, overreached, went for it. I think it was in the 200 actually, and I just got injured and was out for a good amount of the outdoor season after that.
How do you bounce back from that? So what's going on in between? What's the lesson learned? Because you still went on to be a professional track and field athlete, but in those moments, what was that? What were the lessons, and how did you cope?
I did not cope very well, especially in the beginning. I didn't want to go to practice. And my coach had this rule that even if you're injured, you go and you sit and watch practice. I didn't go and sit and watch people run around. Uh-huh. And I started feeling better when I did actually end up going. After a while, I just couldn't sit in the room and not do anything. So I started going back to practice. I started feeling better. While I was sitting there watching, there were things that I found to do. And I think they said I'd be out for maybe 8 weeks, and it ended up being
What did you do?
5.
8 weeks?
I tore my hamstring in such a bad way. Then I tried to say, so it wasn't a complete pull. That's interesting because when it's not a complete pull, it can sometimes take longer than if it is, if you just rip it. And then, so it was on the border. And the first 2 times I tried to come back, it just made it worse. So I was just completely out. I couldn't do anything. But I started feeling better just being in that atmosphere. And then again, just seeing the people that I know I can compete with or better than, just excelling, made me say, okay, you've got to focus and realign. The hay is in the barn. Something another coach used to say, that I like to steal: the hay's in the barn. The work is already done. You've already ran as fast as you wanted to. You just have to do it again. So that was my mindset going into the second half of the season. And again, as an athlete, when you get into these scenarios, when you get into competition, I always think that there's a little piece, if your mind frame, if your perspective is right, you can get a little bit more out of it than you think is physically possible. If you go into it thinking you're just going to crush it, you're going to exceed expectation just because of where your mind is. And that was my mindset going into the end season. It absolutely didn't work. I think about that a lot because I never quite figured out what got me from there, from actually thinking, hey, you have the perfect mindset. You're going to go in, mind over matter. You're going to kill it. And that didn't happen. And then 2 weeks later, I was training for the Olympics. I just feel like it's the brand of the Olympics. It's like the Olympics. You're going to get your crap together to make it to the Olympics. And eventually I did. I went to the Olympics and I completely bombed. Not because, though, of anything physical or anything like that. Right? I got there. If you ask me how many people
this was
were in
Athens, right?
This was in Sydney.
In Sydney,
2000,
okay. All right.
Australia. And Kathy Freeman, who's Australian, ended up winning it. So you have this Australian star. There's no short of 1 million people in the stands. I'm sure you can fact check it. Maybe 2 million. And we were in the same event. Oh, she steps out. And I don't know if you've ever heard 3 million people clapping and screaming at the same time, but 5 million people were clapping and cheering at the same time. And it was an incredible sound. And my heart was in my throat and I just could not get over it. I couldn't move. The people behind me, the runner in the lane behind me, because they line you up by lanes to walk out, she pushed me the entire way. I just wouldn't move. She pushed me she got me from the call area to my lane. That's how I got there. I blacked out for about 53, 54 seconds. I don't even remember where I ran, but it was not fast enough. Afterwards, I was just floored. But one of the most beautiful races that I've ever seen in my life was Kathy Freeman winning that
gold medal. So I was going to ask, so what was that like, the first, other than the performance part of it, getting out onto the track, what was that experience like, the Olympics overall?
Overall, it was the first one. It was the first time I was even at a competition that was remotely like that. So a lot of it was overwhelming. A lot of the time I did feel like I was out of my element. And with the team that I was with and the contingent that I was with, it was almost the same for everyone else. I didn't really have anyone to say, here's what you expect and here's how you handle it. And now, like in 2016 and into the Tokyo 2020 games in 2021, I took that role to be that person for the Guyanese team because I feel like maybe I wouldn't have won. I definitely wouldn't have won. Kathy Freeman totally could have performed differently if I had someone to say, hey, new fish, this is how you swim in these big waters.
But I think you touched on like the dealing with overwhelm and being out of your element. So how do you adjust for that going forward? What's the mental shift?
Just preparing for it. after that, I talked to people that were for Athens, which were my second Olympics. I talked to people that were going. I talked to people that have been there. I found out who was on the team. And just at that point, I had some more experience because I was done with school in 2000. So I was now a professional runner. That's how I was making my living for the 4 years after that. So I had some more experience, and it's all in preparation. You don't know. You just don't know what you don't know. So I just did a good job of asking the people that were there before, and did not just people that were there because I wanted to do well, but the people that did well there about their experiences.
Okay. So to preparation, understanding the landscape, conversations, people who've gone before you to manage overwhelm and being out of your element. Did you ever get to the point that you felt like you were in your element, or that the overwhelm was not there as well?
You're always going to feel something, but I wouldn't describe it as feeling overwhelmed after that. After Sydney, I wouldn't say I was overwhelmed.
And what was different other than the preparation? Anything different in the preparation?
Growth. The thing about training for the Olympics is it's not a 1 month or a 1 year thing. It's a 4-year cycle. After the first one, my coach and I talked about it, and I said, hey, they're just like back to being the metaphor for life. Just like with a race and having a race plan, there's got to be a way for me to just sneak in some of these mental tricks along the way.
Mental tricks?
Yeah, so that I can handle it. Like, I'm clearly sensitive to really loud sounds, and there's always a lot of people at the Olympic Games. So dealing with that, I went to concerts.
That simple?
Little bit more. One of the things, but I was always thinking of different ways to adapt and adjust to things that would either distract me or make me feel that way again. Or I went to the games, I would make sure I look up what the local foods were, because a lot of the athletes of the Olympics like to eat McDonald's. I don't like McDonald's, even if it's the good McDonald's that's overseas. So checking out whatever the local cuisine is, so that when I get there, I won't just be eating bread and water because I don't like anything. Things like that. Just thinking of the things that would offset me or make me feel overwhelmed or distract me, and trying to mitigate everything before I get there.
You touch on some interesting themes of preparation, growth and development. Walk me through and take us through like where you are now. You went from being a professional athlete to a coach, now the head coach of St. John's University. Talk about that transition and the growth and the journey from being responsible just for you and focusing just on you to now being responsible for a group of almost 50. So what's that growth, and how did you move to this new space?
I'm always trying to find ways to leverage my experience and the people that I know to help my athletes along on their journey. The sacrifices that I made were easier for me because I felt like I was doing myself a favor. I always felt very sold on my goals. Like this was the thing I wanted to do for me. So a big part of, I think, my success with my athletes is either finding out what they're sold on or getting them sold on sports in this way. And then it becomes easier because then they drive. The technical know-how part, I think, is easy because you can always figure out how to coach. There's workouts everywhere. You can always put something together. And if you're consistent enough, they're going to do all right. But we've had Big East MVP, Big East champion, Big East all points performer, all these things almost every year since I've been here at St. John's University, And I think those people that ended up being that, people were just sold more than anybody else on what their goals were and what they were trying to achieve. So in terms of bringing my experiences or my life forward to my current role, I think that's the biggest thing that I bring with me. Right up there with that is an amazing staff because I'm not doing it alone. I managed to find some people that are just as sold on St. John's University and on track and field, and they run it as much as I do.
Going from that individual contributor kind of a deal, and it's just you, and that's what's cool about track. So, for instance, I often say in my professional career, right, after track and field, it was like give me a goal and I can go away and work on it. I'm happy to know, I know that it's going to happen next year, but I can control all the variables between July 1st and May 25th the following year. And most of those things are within my control. But then the shift to being responsible for others, that took a while to kind of get there. How do you manage that? Because you go from, and I think we may have had this conversation, you go from having to get to the point where you block out everything for you to perform. Now you're in that space where you have to allow things in for the group to perform. So what was that transition like?
I mean, the first year was interesting because I think I only gave negative feedback or corrective. Correct. I want to say corrective, not negative, but corrective feedback. Like I only talked to people when I needed them to correct something, and it didn't work that great. And halfway through the first year, I was like, oh, they want me to tell them, keep doing this. They needed the positive prompting as well. So that was an adjustment. But the other thing that helped me too, I like I said, I am the big sister, and unfortunately my siblings didn't all go away. So I was used to still in that context being responsible for people. So it was marrying the two, being big sister and then being this solo athlete, because as a professional athlete, I was the only one that my coach had. So it was just me and my coach. I didn't have a partner for a good while. I did eventually get one, and that was great. So it was just almost a perfect storm of these experiences coming together. But again, it took a lot of practice because for years it was just me, my coach, minimal talking, just corrective stuff. And then here we are with 18 to 22-year-olds who want to know everything along the way and just trying to manage that. So I learned to communicate differently. To certain things that I would say, here's your feedback in practice. And the other things I'll think about and send you an email later, or had to find ways to give them the information they want. I don't like talking, and you know that, even though you asked me to do this show, I don't like talking.
Thanks.
So I just had to find a way to communicate with them.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And how the formative years of our lives impact so many other things. Motivation back then was that external part of it, the ability to show you, I can do this. What motivates you now? What fuels you now?
A huge part of my motivation now is being able to see the success of the athletes, seeing their growth, and partially being responsible for that.
Partially being responsible.
I say partially because a lot of it has to come from them. Learned in my very first year, if you want it more than them, it's not going to work out. You're just going to get hurt. So I say partially because the responsibility still lies on each individual athlete to want it and to be willing to do the work to get it.
But when I say motivated as well, because you're not just coaching here. You do the Olympic committee stuff. You do a bunch of other things. What keeps you going more than just what's in front of you?
Cliche as it sounds, I do want to make the world a better place in that I don't want people to have to go through the things that I went through. I had a pretty good life, and people helped me along the way that didn't have to. And so I want to be essentially the person that I would have needed, or the person that other people were to me to help me succeed. In a way, I had a really good coach. I had people volunteer to help me with things. I remember I was talking to someone and I was just mentioning how rough it was being a starving athlete. I was at actually a Manhattan College basketball game, and this alumni that I had no idea who he was apparently had went to the ATM, took out $500 and slipped it to me on his way out because he heard me talking about how hungry I was.
This was after school?
This was after school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty cool, right?
Things like that really fueled my passion. And again, I always saw my track and field career as such a selfish act and for me. And it was just like these people just funded this thing or helped me with this thing that I wanted to do for myself. And so I see my life in a way now that I had to at least give some of that back.
Oh, so you're sharing it back. Okay, cool. What advice, not like now I'm thinking about it. So now that you're at this point, a very different place, what advice would you give your younger self then?
You
Like
are not ugly.
Oh, that's
Like-
still all the way back to there. all the way.
Well,
all
I
the way
was
back.
young then.
Okay,
That was,
all right,
that
all
was
right.
a younger
All the-
me.
all the way back.
That's what I would say is that you're not ugly. And indeed,
And where is Bernadette, or whatever her name is now?
I don't know.
Okay, we should try to find her.
Probably somewhere happy, but
Yeah.
whatever. I hope. I wish her no harm, no ill will. But I would say to myself, obviously, definitely in all seriousness, you're not ugly. But even if you were, that shouldn't stop you from doing anything. Anyone else's perspective or anyone else's box that they want to put you in shouldn't confine you from what it is that you want to do.
What do you think's next for you?
Actually, I would like to run for a seat on the Guyanese Olympic Association Executive Board.
Oh, wow. So you're put it out there. Put it out into the
putting it out
universe.
there.
Let it come back.
Hopefully it comes back. Generally, I want to be happy, continue to find selfish acts for myself that benefit other people. Eventually, I want to retire and live in a shack on a beach somewhere, preferably a beach that I can own. So
You're going to own the beach.
maybe just a part
All
of
right.
it, the part that I live on.
I'm
So
with you.
my work now is to be able to fund that lifestyle.
Okay. I just want to be able to visit. So just remember,
Absolutely.
you're going to keep close. So it's interesting though, like you're doing so much, right? And you talked about overreaching and getting hurt, right? How do you view now rest and recovery? How do you thinking about your peak performance today? How do you approach your rest and recovery? How do you approach getting up and being ready to do this stuff every day?
Actually, when I think about doing the physical demands of training for the Olympics or throughout my career, it was a given. I never doubted, I never had any question that rest and recovery was important, just because your body will not do the things it needs to do if you don't rest. For some reason, since I retired from athletic competition, I felt, and I hate to admit it now, but I felt like rest wasn't that important. There's no physical demand. You just do this and that's it. You can.
How has that worked for you?
When I was younger, it worked.
Right.
Now that I'm in my mid-40s, it's clear that rest is just as important for your mental focus and well-being as it was for my physical well-being as an athlete. It's still not something that comes very natural to me. Again, just because it was ingrained in me. Rest is for physical recovery. Sleep is for to get your body to recover. But now I can see that it's clearly important for your mental focus and your ability to get through life efficiently and be your best self and present well. So it does take some work to prioritize it. I'm not going to lie. Every day it's a work in progress because there's always more to do. And I think I've built my life in such a way that I extend myself to people because I do want to help people. I do want to be there for young people, especially women of color. There's so many groups that I feel like I'm responsible to give back to. And so it can get overwhelming. So I have to be as diligent as I was as an athlete to prioritize rest and recovery.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize that. You stumble upon things along the way, and I didn't realize how much being recovered or fresh impacts your day. So it's your mood, how much you would actually take in. So it impacts so much. And I learned it just from the international travel part of it. And I didn't realize the less rested I was, the more impatient I was. It almost like I became another person. But you really, to the same comment though, I think peak performance at any point in life requires similar things. And I see often that the only way that we can moderate our energy system is through diet, sleep, and exercise, right? Because the body creates its own energy. But what's cool though is that, and before we go into some of the EQI stuff, which I think is really cool, is that many professional athletes who, once they're done doing it, they're done doing it. They don't do it. But you're still pretty active and it's evolved for you. What's your thinking behind that? Because it's very different than you would see many others. So how do you keep active? What was that shift for you that still keeps you going in at least the physical part of it?
I did stop after I retired. I stopped completely, maybe for 2 years. But again, going back to the things that worked for me during that time, I didn't feel like I needed rest, which was absolutely not true. So a part of me getting back into it was like, all right, now I need this physical activity to force myself to prioritize rest and recovery. And what that ended up doing was balancing out things for me. Obviously, the benefits were there, but the reason I got back into it was so that I could say, all right, you need to go to bed because you have all these things to do. This is going to take things out of you physically and you need to put it back in. And honestly, I became a more well-rounded person. And so I continue to do those things because of the benefits of it. Of course, more so now the working out is for aesthetics, right? So there's obviously health benefits, but it's an aesthetic focus.
All right. It's an aesthetic focus. Still, Bernadette's coming through in many different ways. All right. You know what?
Scarred me.
We should try to find her. But then I think in the recent past, it was your introduction to the EQI stuff. So what made you interested in it? Or maybe share the story of how we actually connected and for you to check out the EQI 2.0 assessment.
I still think it's funny that I know probably 20 people that you know pretty closely, right? Who's it, including one of your best friends, and we've never met until very late in life. So actually, I think Lyndon is who one of our mutual friends mentioned that you were doing this and I should look into it. And if my memory serves me correctly, I am going on about 5 hours of sleep, so it may not be. But if my memory serves me correctly, it was leading up to my birthday and we were talking and you were mentioning that you were doing it. You were doing the EQI assessments. I don't remember if I hinted that it would be a good present to me or you mentioned something, but it ended up being one of the best birthday presents that I've ever had.
I think I hinted that it would
only
be.
because
No, it seems right that I take credit for this. That's a good one. No, I didn't remember. Yes, I remember giving you the present. Sorry.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm still thanking you for that. But that's how it came on my radar. I'm always open to ways to improve. Around the time this was happening, I was coaching for about 6 or 7 years as an assistant coach at St. John's University. I had just gotten promoted to associate head coach. And I think it started to become clearer that there might be a really good future in this if I can not just leverage myself, but learn a little bit more about how my responses would be in this type of landscape and just being more deliberate and being really what I want to say is be a better leader, right? Because I was going from staff of 6 or 7 people and being a peer with 5 of them and having a head coach above me to almost being his equal. And then I'm going to take over this. So I wanted to make sure that I was the kind of leader that I think I'm going to be. And if not, how do I close that gap? For me, that was the big piece. So when you came on my radar with this, I was like, the universe is talking to me. I have to do this.
Okay. What was some of the big takeaways that you grabbed from the first assessment? And why I say I'm going to share the other things that I thought stood out in my head. But
one of the things that I wanted to work on, or one of the things that it showed I needed to work on, was my communication, the way I communicate, the way I receive information. Those were, I think, the 2 big things for me.
The communication part of it. Well, you know what? I remember a call when you were in Japan at the IOC stuff, and you didn't think you deserved to be there.
Yes.
Right?
That's the other piece. Yeah.
No, but I think that was like one of the interesting things about all the assessments that I've done, and it's not always it's what's interesting about being competing, going back to what you shared before, is that many of us have the same opportunities.
Yeah.
Not all of us actually make the best of the opportunities. And what's been the pleasure of working with you is that once we chatted about it, you saw value in it, and we always followed up and we have these conversations. And one of the more moving things was you called from Japan and you're like, hey, I'm having this issue because I don't feel like I should be here, which kind of in some ways imposter syndrome, right? You deserve to be there, but there's something in the back of your mind that's actually pulling you back to you're not worthy of it. But that was one of the interesting things that I would say. But you took it, but then we had the conversation. It was always forward. We always move forward in each conversation, right? Which I thought was interesting. But what was that moment? And because the difference between you have an issue, but you say, why would you call? There's so much impulses, but to then say, let's have a conversation about this is so very different than, and I don't want to say than many people would do, or most people would do. We usually have an issue and we sit in it rather than trying to move towards a solution. And I think you talked about that mental model, give you a problem and you'll try to solve it. So what was going on in that period of time?
Yeah, I think I suffered from a bout of imposter syndrome at that point. And again, and I talk about my work with the IOC and Pan Am Sports going hand in hand. And I was in a room with people from the IOC and all these heavy hitters in our sport. And I just didn't feel like I belong. And they're looking at me for answers. They're asking questions. We're having interactions. And I just, for a second, couldn't remember how I got there, why I deserved to be there, and what I had to contribute. So I made the right decision, I think, and I called you, and you were able to get me back on track and feeling confident again. One of the things that I did learn throughout my career, is that I won't always have the answers, and you can fake certain things, but if you don't get them, if you don't find someone that knows the answer, then you're losing out and selling yourself short. Just that overwhelming feeling, for example, at the first Olympic Games that I went to. And I felt what I thought was something similar to that. I couldn't quite figure out what I did to deserve to be there because so much was being demanded or asked of me. And it wasn't necessarily that it shouldn't have been in a position where people are supposed to ask this, but self-doubt crept up on me and I tried talking myself down and it wasn't it
wasn't working.
It just wasn't working. I was like, somebody's got to have the answer. And I feel like you were so good with the other aspects of the EQI. I just felt like you were the perfect person to call in that moment and say, hey, I'm trying to find out what I did to be here, why I deserve to be here so I can move forward. I was just very stuck on, how did you even get here? And
which is a conversation that had nothing to do with what was going on in the moment, right?
It doesn't, but it's interesting where the mind puts you. It really took me back to almost an infantile stage that I couldn't get past, and breaking it down the way that you did. And I think one of the good things about the way you do things, and even as we were talking during the assessment period, is that you took me out of that moment. We had a totally separate conversation about something else. And then we came back to it, but not in a full frontal way. It was almost, let's talk about these things and your accomplishments and what you've been working on. And then it kind of led me to say, this is why I deserve to be here, or this is how I got here. So it was very much about giving me tools to figure it out for myself and then say it to someone else with some conviction.
Yeah, that's actually pretty cool. And I don't think you hear it because that's one of the things I'm working on myself. We always have that voice in the back of our heads, limiting beliefs pulling us back. So it's always interesting to hear those things. So on the insights from the tool again, so when you were promoted to head coach, we worked a little bit on that idea of what got you here won't get you there. Some of the behavioral changes that would probably be necessary to evolve into that leader that you wanted to be. What were some of the things, and I know we used it in different ways, but what were some of those insights that you gathered from that second iteration of using the emotional intelligence assessment.
One thing I do want to say about that experience, I thought it was an important thing for us to do. I was new to the role. I brought in new staff, two of them who have way more experience in coaching than I do, someone else that was just starting out in the field. And just, if you look at our experiences, our background between the coaches, managers, office staff, and then the people that we come in contact with, the backgrounds were totally different. The education, communication style, it was just all over the place. And one thing I know about the nuances of a track and field season is that at some point during the year, a lot of the communication is like on feeling and not nonverbal. But everyone is just so busy and into what they're doing. So I wanted to make sure that before we start on this journey and get into a point where we might be yelling at each other or communicating ineffectively, is that we figure out first who we are and who we are in relation to each other. Who's going to be good at being the peacemaker, who's going to be the yeller, who's going to freak out, who's going to do well under pressure, so we know who our point person would be when certain things come up, and have conversations before we get into that situation. Here's what you can deal with. Here's what is expected of you. And we ended up doing it together. And I think it worked very well. Like even now with some of the new people that came on, we do some of the exercises that we've learned from that session. And we have more defined roles as a group. So
you did the assessment for you when you were promoted to the associate head coach. And then what was interesting as well, when you were promoted to head coach, we then had a different approach to getting that team or building the new coaching staff together. So we had talked about it, but you gravitated towards the idea. Then we did individuals and we compared it as a team. But maybe you can just share some of the insight that you grabbed or the team grabbed from that part of the process. Yeah. So like you said, I did mine first and we discussed the results. I knew going into this new role as head coach that I wanted to create a specific culture on the team and I wanted to be a certain type of leader. So after I did mine and we talked about, the group did theirs individually as well, and we all met and compared what the results were so we could see how we're showing up as a group and what each of our strengths and weaknesses were and how they would offset each other so we can have a much better and a more cohesive working relationship. I appreciate the receptiveness. And I find that a lot of times from that peak performance perspective, we always have, going right back to, we have the opportunity. And I appreciated you bringing me in. We talked about the group together and how you set the goals and how you chase those goals for the year. So no, I totally appreciate it. I think that was when I was like formulating all the service offerings and trying to figure out whatever else it would be. So it was all ideas at that point. I've done it to a certain point, but I appreciate your willingness to experiment and find a new way forward. So totally grateful for that. So as we wrap up today, what's the through line in your life? What's that, like what's gotten to this point and will keep you moving forward? You can share with the audience. Aside from Bernadette, I would say dapper. I would definitely say not allowing other people's perspective to lock you into a specific path and just being willing to make the sacrifices for your dreams is almost going to ensure that they come true. Wow. I think we should just put a pin in it right there. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate the time always. And I so appreciate the opportunity to chat with you this way. All right. I really enjoyed my conversation with Aliann. What I learned was that no other person's perspective should be a limiter for me because it does not determine where I can or should go. Be mindful of the imposter syndrome. Those conversations creep into our subconscious and probably are not true in the current moment. So it's important also to be graceful with yourself, because about 80% of us will experience those feelings of not being enough or not belonging from time to time. And chances are it's not true. The other part is, if you need help, find someone who can help you and then ask for help, because that's the only way forward. Thank you for being part of our conversation. I look forward to sharing the next episode with you, where we'll explore the reverse mentorship concept. And if you haven't checked out other episodes, please do. I would appreciate your feedback. Nigel Franklin Way on Instagram, or nigel@meinc.health.com. And always, as I close, from a heart filled with gratitude and appreciation, thank you for spending time. Thank you for sharing your mental space and energy with me. And until we meet again in this space, take good care of you.